And now on the line is Neasa Ní Chnáimhsí from Donegal. Neasa, welcome back to Near FM.
Good morning, Darren. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Neasa. Neasa, today is our third interview off Sperla on Near FM. I last spoke to you on the station not far off 2 years ago. I last spoke to you soon after the government's June 2022 redress package was announced. This is a big question, Neasa, but feel free to take as long as you want answering it. But can you give our listeners on Near FM a bit of an update as to where the situation with Mica in Donegal stands today and how it has evolved, if it has, since our last interview?
Yeah. Okay, so it has evolved, relatively speaking. Compared to where we were at, the second scheme was better. Whereas prior to that, they were trying to label the initial scheme as a 90-10 scheme. It turned out to be an absolute, it was a Hames and turned out to be 60-40, and it's largely understood to have been, it was packaged as 90-10 when actually it was 60-40. The second scheme, as you're saying, that came through in 2022 then, was relatively speaking better, but that's still not saying much. So then you were talking about being out kind of tens of thousands, depending on the size of the house. So ultimately the cap was at 420, which seems like a huge amount, but at the minute it's very hard to build a house for 420. Our house, having said that, is a semi-detached on a housing estate, so it's not in any way considered to be extravagant to expect these houses to be rebuilt. The progress that we've made physically here on this development, for example, is, I'm just looking out the window, there's one house that has been rebuilt. So it's exactly the same house as was before, 3 or 4 years ago, but it is now rebuilt. They're not quite in it yet. It's taken about maybe 18 months to rebuild the houses. The other two I'm looking at have been demolished and just last week they started to build back up again. So that physical, it gives us great hope to see that there has been progress made, and our house would be, like our two semi-detached would be 5 and 6 on the list, if you like. So we're looking to move out of our house in the summertime to start the demolition. So definitely progress. If it had stayed the way it was initially, they all would be up at this stage. Having said that, the new scheme that's in effect still isn't covering many of the things that need covered. For example, the foundations. So at the minute, they're still expecting us to build the houses on foundations that haven't been replaced, which ultimately further down the line, you can imagine, could cause further mayhem, further cost, and further headaches for all involved. That's just one example of the stuff that still isn't being covered. To be honest, at the minute with the new scheme, the thing that's proven the most difficult is the logistics, the bureaucracy, the moving of goalposts, and frankly the county council and how they're handling this. So if you wanted to look at it and give them the benefit of the doubt, at best they are not understanding what they're doing, verging on incompetent, not able to put through whatever paperwork needs done because they don't know, there's no precedent to it. They haven't done this before and nobody's trained for it. At worst, they're doing it deliberately as a stall tactic to ensure that the coffers are protected, and ultimately, if this is stalled, they get to figure out what the hell they're doing because it's an absolute mess. There are certain portals, you need to see it to believe it, but the portals online that you have to upload all these documents, reports, assessments and various, it's very, very, very complicated, way beyond what I could ever understand. I just do what the engineer tells me to do, what the architect tells me to do. But even when you jump through all those hoops, they'll come back to you and say, oh, but what about this? And then when you do that and you're very careful to follow due process, they'll move the goalposts and say, oh yeah, okay, so you've sorted that, but what about this, which wasn't a problem a year ago? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. It's incredibly complex. And where people are kind of struggling at the minute, it's with trying to navigate the bureaucracy of it because the county council do not seem to know what they are doing. And they're not even covering it up well. That's where we're at with the new scheme. So although the new scheme is better than the original scheme, this is kind of generation 3, if you like. This is the third version. Myself and my husband are in the second version. which is a wee bit different. And you can imagine trying to make sense out of all these developments that actually have still come to nothing. We're still in the house. There are still thousands of people living in houses that aren't safe to live in, with black mould in the house, black mould up the walls of the kitchens. I mean, you only have to Google it to see the pictures of the state of the house these people are living in. Some kids have asthma, and there are health issues associated with this. So back in the day, when I was trying to kind of flag this up as a humanitarian crisis, it was not an exaggeration, and we really need everybody to understand that. At the meeting the other night where the People's Document came out in the Gateway in Buncrana, there was 1,000 people in one room that evening. There was barely room to stand. And that was the opportunity for the local politicians to respond to the People's Document. Can I go ahead and just explain maybe, Darren, what the People's Document is? Okay, so basically this is a document that has been issued by all of the Mica Action Group ancillaries, if you like. They've all got together and come up with a document that kind of gives a definition of what 100% redress is, because clearly the government don't understand what 100% is. Their maths isn't so good. So that document is based on 4 pillars. So you have pillar 1, which is the property, and that means basically you're rebuilding like for like at no cost to the homeowner. So at the minute we're worrying about, is this going to cost us tens of thousands, or is it going to cost us thousands, and where is that going to come from? But that shouldn't be the case, because we paid for the house nearly 20 years ago. The second pillar is process, that there's an end-to-end scheme where it makes sense and due process is productive and stuff actually is made happen. And that the whole, the portal is open online, that you can submit this to and that to. At the minute, that's a whole mess. The third pillar is the people, and that's just about making sure that no one is left behind. Like, we understand prioritisation is important. There are some families in which there's a particular vulnerability. Maybe somebody's been treated with cancer at the minute. Maybe there's severely disabled kids living in these houses, and people are having to move them out of the house for a year and a half. So obviously they need to be prioritised, but there should be no exclusion to that. Nobody should be said, no, you're all right, stay where you are for 3 or 4 years. So proper and timely supports for those affected throughout the process. And the fourth pillar then is prevention. And that's basically just making sure that this doesn't happen again, and that the government follow the science. We're not asking them to follow our pleas or our persuasive, approach. We are asking them to follow the science, that there are proper standards, proper enforcement, and ultimately proper accountability. Like, it has to be made clear to every taxpayer in the country, whether they're Mica affected or not, why this happened, who let it happen, because we're talking about a certain amount of cover-up. It's only a question of at what level that cover-up happened. Was it, because there were checks meant to be in place. There are 3 sets of people accountable for this mess. Yes, one is the company that built the blocks that are responsible for the defective materials, for the deleterious materials. Absolutely. They are still working. They are still operating out of that same but only in this country, Darren, would that happen. Like, their lorries, I won't mention their names, but their lorries no longer carry their name. They've painted across all their stuff. They are shipping, and I just heard the other night on Tuesday evening that their lorries were seen heading towards Dublin. So be aware that these people are operating and still operating, and that's legal. Like, how has that been let happen? They're still making money out of this. So, the rest of the country's kind of saying, oh, why can't they be held responsible for the quarries? And yeah, that's right, but the government still isn't holding them responsible. They're still making their millions. And the rest of us are sitting here watching them making their millions. Like, it's such a slap in the face to know that place is still open. Anyway, sorry, I'm on a rant. The second thing then, the people that are responsible ultimately are the National Standards Authority. So they signed off on those blocks. They signed off on the standards, on the concrete products coming from the quarries. That actually is supposed to go through checks. Somebody signed off on that and said, this product is fit for purpose and meets our standards nationally. Who signed that stuff? Like, who literally physically signed those pieces of paper and said, this is okay to go, when they didn't even cast an eye over it? And we're not talking about one check or two checks. There are continuous checks meant to be taking place on those bricks under the National Standards Authority of Ireland. And it never happened. The third people that are responsible then are the County Council, because they sign off equally on those products and those buildings. So when all that construction work, God be with the halcyon days of the Celtic Tiger, you know, that's when we bought the house in like 2005. They were checking these houses, they were signing off on them. God knows we all have to jump through hoops for planning permission. There's none of this stuff ever simple or easy. But on paper, somebody signed off on all this stuff. So yes, you have the quarry people, absolutely. But as I say, they're still making their big bucks, you know. Then you have your National Standards Authority signed off on it. And then you have your County Council ultimately putting together the estates that we now have, huge proportion of them in Buncrana that have mica. There are probably at the minute more buildings in Buncrana that have mica than don't. That's how bad it is up here. So you're really at the epicenter of things, which is why there was such a huge turnout in the Gateway on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of information, Darren. Sorry, but
no,
no, I should have spoken to you.
Okay, you've answered a couple of questions I was going to ask you. Okay, and your movement is standing for candidates in the local elections, aren't you? Can you tell me who these candidates are?
Now you're asking me, and we only heard about him on Tuesday night when he got up and spoke. I can't actually remember his name. Apologies, but we do have 100% Redress Party that's going to stand. Now, for the purposes of election, whether you're talking about local election or, you know, ultimately if it comes to a general election, there's no telling what's going to happen there. In my life, I never thought I'd say I would vote Sinn Féin. But here we are. And truth be told, a lot of the people are going to be voting for what they don't want rather than what they do want. We do have some excellent, like, independent TD or independent councillors around here, which are likely to do very well, because the party politics is what has blighted this whole process. You have Charlie McConnell and Niall Blaney, who are just looking to be backed by their party, and all scruples have gone out the window. Like, there is an absolute vacuum of integrity in politics in this country. That's kind of a given at the minute. You have to allow for that, which is so wrong. But Pierce Doherty did turn up at the meeting on Tuesday night, as did Joe McHugh, Padraig McLaughlin, and they spoke very well. Now, obviously, Padraig McLaughlin and Pierce Doherty are of Sinn Féin, so they're there to garner votes. But I have to say, I put some credence on what they said in terms of their intentions to, first of all, back the People's Document. They have looked at it and they have endorsed it and they are good to go with it. And we have been given Sinn Féin's well, I suppose you can't promise or whatever, but they have assured us that they will stand behind the People's Document and make it work if they get into power. Easy for them to say at the minute, I suppose. But there are ways around it. All that was thrashed out over a 3.5-hour meeting on Tuesday night. We came out of it exhausted. But the purpose of the meeting was to find out what the politicians' response was to the People's Document. So it was put in front of them a couple of weeks ago. They had a time to digest and to come back to us. And really the two people that really needed to turn up and show their steel chose not to turn up. And which is just yet another slap in the face.
That was Charlie McConnell and someone else as well, was it?
And Niall Blaney, who works from Letterkenny. But the problem is now, there were, Pierce Doherty was saying actually on Tuesday morning he had been to see a house with Mary Lou McDonald, and it was in Gweedore, which is kind of as far west of Donegal as you can get. And up until this point, back there, maybe in the Rosses and that, they had thought, oh, this has nothing to do with this area. But it's starting to come through. And as somebody spoke about the day of the meeting on Tuesday, there's a lot of people in denial. We were the people in denial. Like, we had builders in years ago to build up the corner of our house. You know, the coin on the corner had crumbled away at the bottom and it was kind of receding. So we had to come in and get that corner of the house built up. And the first of the houses in our development at that stage was going through the Mica process and fighting. And the rest of us in the other 27 houses on the estate were kind of going, oh, God love them, isn't that desperate? Sure, thank God we're all right. That was Mica. And when I look back on it now, I kind of cringe because I was so naive. It just kind of didn't occur to me that the problem could be as massive as it has turned out to be. And here we are now getting ready to demolish in the summertime. So there are 28 houses in this development. One has been rebuilt, 2 are down being rebuilt. We're next on the list to move out in the summer, and there are another, 22, 23 houses after that to be done on this state alone. But people can't afford to get the testing done. Chances are you can be 95% certain all 28 houses will have to go because the same bricks will have been used for the vast majority. You know, it's just an inevitability and it's beyond depressing.
When you say the 28 houses will have to go, these are the houses that originally have Mica. They aren't houses that have been redeveloped, no?
Oh, God, no. No, chance to be a fine thing. These are the houses, the 28 houses that were built between what would have been 2005 and 2010. Because we had a couple of houses added on once the development had been finished, you know. So when the Celtic Tiger was making his money, God knows, it wasn't going into our bank accounts. It was the bankers, it was the construction industry, it was the councils, the taxes, the VAT, all of those people were the people getting the money. And now for the government to be turning their backs on, you know, the government were responsible for the Celtic Tiger at the time. So if you're going to sign a piece of paper saying that you're producing a dependable, reliable product, then you are responsible for the fact that that was an absolute paper tiger. You couldn't depend on those foundations. So how in God's name are you now going to spend taxpayers' money rebuilding the same house but with dodgy foundations? I mean, as I say, only in this country there.
Agus Inishowen lína tá Neasa Ní Chnáimhsí ó Donegal, Neasa fád go dtí an
Nudging right there.
Okay, Neasa leir mé leat ar an leir seo den ó dhearnacha beagán ní gábh líon ó hen, agus leir muid ag an am sin fin bagáiste cútah a raibh an rialtas tar éis ógurt timpeall an ama sin faoi Mica. Tá is agam go raibh tú ag caint ar nniuach tíide cethar cúpla lá hen, agus tá is agam go bhfuil toghcháin ag tarlú imlína. Is ceismhóirí seo a Neasa ach an féidir leat ar dús acu a thuairt stom faoi de chás pásanta agus faoi na daoine eile nuain an ngáil le scéal Mica ón óir dhearnach a leabharmuid le chéile i bhliain fit dó agus a intin dom an bhfuil sibh sásta lena bhfuil ag áirí leis an rialtas dulling leis an bhaib?
Well, ag glad bheith cinseach bhfuil muid sásta leis an dul chun cin atá déanta. Bhí mig Lordslán rud arú an orí agus ag an am sin faoi láthair inis támuid ar an tríú scéim. So an céad scéim a bhí an bhí sin animas a bheith mar nócha agus jai faoin géad, but really seasca agus daithid faoin géad a bhí a gceist ó thaobh cúteamh de. So ní ribri sé sin aontaí an ahan daine ná ribri sé tharó sé rial go le brú bhí agin sin ag an am mar nach chu sé practicúil, you know, an darna scéim sin an scéim ar bhfuil mé héan agus far céalas agam. So tá mu déine ar an scéim sin agus le bogu amachchas an seach le linn an tairí sé thuginn. Agus sásta go leor go mé an seans sin an but níl muid ag dúil leis. Like sa Jerry hir hall, dá méú an saoil ar mo hull agam. Ní bhéú or on bogu amachchas an seach. So really ní cúteú é seo. Tá differ idir cúteú agus redress. You know, seo targad a tógu uaine. Argad a déicmuid agus a chaithmuid chor a bheith fiche blian ó hin. But tá muid ag trid go fóil agus an pobl a gutine ar an tríú scéim faoi láthair. Seo an scéim atá idir láha acu. But could war stuff not glúdian on tríú scéim fiú. wad níos fearr ná an céad ceann, yes, sin dul humkin, agus muid bras afta sin ecail, but cuid war stuff nach nían an céal go fóil. Agus níl na polachóri a géri dulling lec leis an aib, níl se de géri an scéim a chur a gréach mar is ceart. So vecin tú na húnéri tí a tar a géri file fríd an frósé seo. An méid ober fáper atá I gceist, agus teigem go gaithim muid bheith fragrach as a rod, but níl an Virginia just ag comu suas figurí na títhe seo, like seo figurí na ninnealtóri, agus figurí na halterí, na nalterí, you know, the architect. Seo an óliacht atá crochíthe agé na hana féin, bliantí ó hin, agus muid go fóil ag trid. Mar hampla an scéim nua an tríú scéim, Jerem sa nua, but níl se could, you know, ta se sean galoor foin am seo, God knows níl Jeffer den yerbíon seo, but ní clúdion sin a dúchrai foin seo. So ta se de kaint foin na mílte títhe a hóghail, agus na dúchrai nachwal daingen. Sin rod nach nien an céalarbi, agus sin just jear a punche a wine, a tamar aibagin. So sin an fa, Virginia be mujig bugu max an shock, an sauru se hugin, kai se vegenta, agus kai much just, you know, ibru amach, kaje doi and ibroish sha, dun max agin, a will uchas air, like ni higgin session, level B, kaje tar shul an shaw, agus kai muje will go max and shock, faubli and galai, agus, you know, I mean, Ní dhéanann sé maithas bídit ó héamh meabhar fláinte fiú smuointú no an rud a haulu, but just caitheann muid lanstan a raig céim ar céim agus, you know, plán a legan amach, agus tá plán legi amach agin, but ag an amcéir na higlaat saulu, like, an timní atá I gceist, tá sé dó inste.
Okay, this go is nuach mai go bhfuil dulco cína do cás a rénos agus tú bug ar moch an saoir sé hiún agus is might really go bhfuil Reinstein I go bhfuil obair ag Tyler son Reinstein ar leid ach bei right ar a háirí ag seasamh díobh sa teáin áitiúla I mí an bheitheh an féidir níos mó inse an dumfinn scéil seo an asa?
Yeah, so nor every gahar be ella really o have legislation agus mar sinde and orly one should party politiachta on 100% redress. So ta be air or he on agus jerhen go near o go bralio mar near rare be ella agin on shaw near the near be soft eastuklin on crinier vi on I hawarch on rudder vi on eganam vi mujigiri rud a jerter a hugter guhon fobble a curve we vraj na balachori. So shin on people's document. Agus an rudder vi sa document shin na an sign venu a vi tugka agin kid finged kuchu kid finged an sign venu shin on fobble shaw. Agus vi mujigiri shin a curve we vraj na balachori le filemak ken kenyal fragra vi aku you know ag chak the rash hugin agus kujevi le ra chaku agus vi she aku bejer cookish riv I hawart riv an crenushin ag a ro mila dinge ilaher. So nadini a hyonti suas ben Pierce agus Padrig agus Joe McHugh agus couple dinge ella agus marger to ear hori go lokante go hachil fasta. But near Hyunty Charlie McConnell suas, near Hyunty Niall Blaney suas, the Niall Blaney Hershey hugging, Hyoshe hugging reafust Milchin at Garage Burrub, a grach, I'm on the campaign trail, can't make it, cheers, Niall, like in Anyam J, Milchin at Gulk, shot on Mila Dinya, a VSG, sa Shomershin Ihawarch, bin the constituents bin na dini a vi giri na balachori that o score amach bin on tam bin on anach before difa ve on really neil gahar beanies talked if we laher in nuningal non kesha on aib sha so in anyam j I mean it's mass fluation knock roshid tilchnach chuntu suas ag an rod.
Bhí Thomas Pringle ar freisinach raibh.
Bhí. Agus sin far úsal a rinne cuid war ar son agus higlaat brathir a seahamach gunyenni chilu.
Okay, tá seans mai an go méid ó teáchanim líon an Neasa agus ar an gcéine bé sé ag tarlú go luú an bhblionn siúin. An bhfuil sibh ag smíanamh go méid ar gaibh ag seasamh san ó teáchan sin in Donegal?
Jerhin go vec for differ all war. Kibéalt mar harlíonn sé am léana nóir an bhblionn hugin be ahrú mór le fecail. Ahan chans go mé sin féin I mar a réma a seahamach agus ní crejin goil mé a rách mar níor hogú takeíocht riú de hin féin, but higlad bheith kinse nach dorhí mé takeíocht riú a ríis im a héal de finnigéal ná de sin féin or de finnigéal ná finfáil tá an prasach genta acu as an rud seo agus inéis sin I géirí an rud a chlúdú suas an rud a lúbú, like an spin. Bin an tosiíocht a bhí acu le bliantí fada inis, agus an rud a géirí níos massa, an aib a géirí níos massa an a títhe, ag dul in olcas, agus na costais, ag ardú, agus na bliantí fada catú, like, choú an aib seo os a gór amach, ja bléin jégo hin no 3 bléin a jégo hin. Agus bhí sé de géirí an rud a cheakins, bhí sé de géirí clúas bór a hort dúine a wasan seo. Agus an niis, an aib a géirí níos massa, agus éad go foil, a géirí genu amach gohfuil mujinne cinil santach, a gohfuil muid géirí títhe olhóra a hógail, thuas ar na cric in Donegal. Ní mar sin atá. Tá mise macóní I Jack lascutse in a stad tíhíochta in a bhfuil 8 Jackas fi le Mica. Now, tá trúr acu laghí faoin am seo agus mujinne mar Jeremy bugamach san seo an saoú se hogin. But could war ober le genu a seo amach agus ahan dinne faoi bhrú ag stracalch could acu ag follinch. Couple dinge a chur láv in a más héan mar jaller an rod seo. Ai, tá sin jefni he like. But seo an rod, da mé ha I de 8G, right? Agus da nier filiat go gaihi tú bogu max an seach ar fá blian go leich leis an seo a hógail. Agus beidir gwyl tú chin, beidir gwyl faibna sláinte fad termacha agat. Like, ní fiú an seacha a hógail le bheith practicúil faoin rod. So, ó heh meabhrachláinte de go háirithe do daine atá beidir rubug níos sinna agus ar fin sin. An rud a haulú, like chorú sé grúamart, chorú sé imníart, chorú sé strus milsinachart agus beidir gwyil si ag play le halsin a cudé rodella ag an am sin, like, tá gra jacrochtaí an tail ar siúil faoi láthair, you know, ní Mica an taan aib atá ag na daoine seo, but is I an aib beidir is trimme ó heh cursaí practicúla de.